Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schuman. How well is Indiana doing economically compared to the 49 other states? It seems like a pretty straightforward question, but it's one that's harder to quantify than it might appear. But that doesn't mean the Indiana Chamber is going to stop trying. We've been keeping score in the current Indiana Vision 2025 plan since 2012. And you can go back 12 more years before that to the year 2000 and the first Economic Vision 2010 scorecard. In the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the most recent measurement, and that's the 2020 snapshot of Indiana Vision 2025. We reduced the number of metrics. We focused in on a select number of states in both Midwest neighbors and 5 national competitors. And maybe not surprisingly, we came back with some mixed results. Here to break it all down are 2 members of the Chamber Advocacy. One has been here since before the Economic Vision 2010 plan began back in 2000. The other is the most recent addition to that team, serving as Vice President of Economic Development and Technology. Kevin Brinegar, welcome back to the In Chamber. And Adam Berry, thank you for joining us for the first time.
Happy to be here.
Glad to be with your listeners, Tom.
All right, Kevin, we're going to start with you. I mentioned in the beginning that these comparisons are not always easy to perceive. There's so much information out there, different ways that different researchers look at state comparisons. Why, in your view, is that the case? Kind of give us, the listeners, a little bit of an overview here.
Sure. Well, our Indiana Vision 2025 plan has 4 pillar areas, or drivers as we call them, and collectively there are 37 goals in the Indiana Vision 2025 plan. So when you look at data and try to develop metrics to assess our progress over time and where do we stand compared to other states, we've generated some 62 different metrics that tie to those 37 goals. And that's a whole lot of data, a wealth of data to look at, particularly both for Indiana and the other 49 states. And not surprisingly, our rankings vary depending on which metrics you're looking at.
Adam, as you came up as part of the Chamber team back a little over a year ago or a year and a half ago, certainly brought your experiences with you, and I know you really get into analyzing the data and looking at these things. Talk about how you approach this when you first saw the report card and kind of that voluminous amount of data that is out there.
Yeah, I think, well, certainly there's no shortage of data available and ways to measure state performance. The trick is finding quality data, quality or credible data. So you look at the source of the data, if it's used in other studies, in other research reports, scholarly articles, and you look for what is credible, and then we use it in our report card to show the most accurate, most relevant, most current data to really give folks an idea of where the state stands. And we make some adjustments too. So for example, like with the venture capital that's invested, we look at it as a 3-year rolling average. So not to account for outliers. So it's really just it's a matter of identifying data, credible data, and over time, we partner with a good researcher who goes back to that data repeatedly.
Well, to that point, we have had some of the same data, same metrics in place for over the 20 years that I described. And Adam, as you suggested, we've made adjustments where necessary to incorporate new or more relevant information. Well, let's get to the 2020 snapshot. Adam, I'll go with you first. Start with some of the other states in the comparison. You dug into the numbers, but again, give the listeners, let them know what we did with this first annual snapshot or first snapshot, and which states we looked at, and some of the takeaways about those locations outside of Indiana.
Right. So with our interim report cards, we do an assessment of Indiana compared to all 50 states. This snapshot, we really focused in on two different groupings. The first grouping was our neighbors. So we compared Indiana to Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan. And then we identified what we call competitor states, states that Indiana competes with for jobs and talent. And those states are Iowa, Utah, Tennessee, Minnesota, and North Carolina. If you're asking sort of what stood out is sort of from the snapshot, among the four drivers that we looked at, Illinois and Michigan finished with the highest score amongst our neighbors, and each had two. And Utah was the top performer among our competitor states in three of the four drivers. Utah, again, really stood out with the group. They have 12, Utah has 12 top 10s of the 32 metrics that we looked at for the snapshot. North Carolina has had no bottom 10 rankings in any category. So they're doing well really across the board. Indiana really has some work to do, I think, is sort of the key takeaway here. We were last overall in superior infrastructure, and we also fared relatively poorly in outstanding talent. We were fourth out of fifth amongst our neighbors and fifth out of sixth amongst our competitor states. I will say that there were a few bright spots, however. Indiana was fourth out of the 10 states in attractive business climate. But if you take out the healthcare related metrics, so smoking and obesity, we moved up to number 2, just behind Utah. Also, Indiana was the only one of our neighbors that had a positive in-migration, meaning folks who moved from other states to Indiana. Now, that being said, when you look at our competitors, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah observed more state in-migration than Indiana by an average of tenfold in each of those states.
So lots of information out there about all of these states. Let's look at it with each of the drivers a bit. Adam, I'm going to come back to you a little bit on dynamic and creative culture, but we want to start with outstanding talent. Kevin, the numbers are not great, but if we dig a little deeper, I think we can find some good news there, and that Indiana's heading in the right direction. What are some of the big things to be for listeners and readers of this report to be aware of in the outstanding talent area?
Well, we know for some time that at the K-12 level, we have done well compared to other states in the National Assessment of Education Progress in both grade levels and all three subject areas that are assessed. We are in the top 15 states and in many respects the top 10. But one of the areas that we lag and is a real problem, and it spills over into a number of other metrics, is our level of post-secondary education achievement, both in terms of earning bachelor's and associate's degrees, as well as industry-recognized certificates and certifications, things that employers value and help individuals compete in the 21st century knowledge-based economy. We have adopted the Lumina Foundation's big goal of having 60% of our population have a post-secondary degree or certificate or certification by the year 2025. That was a big, audacious goal. We started in 2012 at about 33% when you add in the certificates and certifications. We are now up to 43%. That's a big jump and a great improvement in the 8 years since that was first measured. And that represents, by my back of the envelope calculations, about 500,000 to 600,000 additional Hoosiers who have a post-secondary degree or credential than was the case in 2012. That's the good news. The bad news is we still rank 38th among the 50 states, and some of our competitor states are at 50% or higher. So they have a larger percentage of their population that has a post-secondary credential. That spills over into our per capita personal income ratings, which continue to drop compared to the other states. We're now, I believe it's Tom 38, and that's been dropping. Even when you adjust for the cost of living, since 2017, we've gone from 20th to 24th, 26th. So we're now in the bottom half of the 50 states, and other states are creating higher paying jobs at a faster rate than we are. And the reason that they're able to do that is because they have a higher educated citizenry than we do in Indiana. So in my view, that's got to be the number one focus, job one for the state of Indiana. And there's some ways to do that we can talk about later in this conversation.
Kevin, I want to add in for the listeners, when you talk about the Lumina goal, and certainly that looks at degrees as well as you mentioned, high quality credentials. Even since the release of our report earlier this summer, Lumina's come out with some new national data, and they're also starting to look at the quality of certificate programs and adding that into their calculation. And in that case, the first time ranking of those, Indiana did fare better than many other states with a higher percentage of the population getting those certificates that contribute to education. So another bright spot there, and one that we'll see much more about as we move forward.
Yeah. Another part of the silver lining, Tom, that I think can come out of this is that the pandemic has caused great disruption, has upset the employment playing field, so to speak. Many folks have been laid off. They have jobs that either won't be there when this all ends or will be radically different. And I'm hoping that this can be a wake-up call to a number of Hoosiers to realize that they don't have the skills that they really need to acquire and maintain living wage jobs in the decades to come.
Yeah, Kevin, one follow-up, and Adam kind of referenced this earlier in his comments, that Indiana has been doing extremely well in the attractive business climate driver, especially when you look at taxes and regulatory framework. But that took a lot of work, a really focused effort over many years. Is that what is needed in a talent area? That concentrated effort on improving those metrics?
Tom, I absolutely think it does and will take that. And I think, again, some progress has been made. Our Commissioner for Higher Education, Teresa Lubbers, has helped drive this effort. But it's going to take a more intensified effort as well. And just to give you one example, the iLearn scores, they're consistent with they're not good. We have below 50% of our students that are passing either the reading or the math portions of iLearn, let alone both. And there's been a tendency in the General Assembly and by the elected officials to sort of sweep those under the rug. We're not going to release the scores when we should. We're not going to use those scores in our accountability system. We're going to, that's been paused for 2 years. And what we need to do is take a step back and say the scores are what they are. The test is valid. It was developed by Indiana teachers. The cut scores on what's a passing score were developed by Indiana teachers. And we need to take that as reality and redouble our efforts at the K-12 level, while at the same time doing all we can to make opportunities available through programs such as the Next Level Jobs training programs to lift up our adult workforce, because that's going to be the key to rising per capita personal income and competing with the states that we compete with that are manufacturing states, that are biomedical states, that are technology states around the country.
Well, let's go to the, excuse me, the dynamic and creative culture driver, also so critical. And really, that was pretty much the basis for some of those competitor states that we analyzed in this snapshot. Adam, this kind of plays into the theme of mixed messages, because if you look, 4 of Indiana's 6 top 10 national rankings occur in this driver, which is great news. Those are in the areas of, let's see if I can remember them, exports, foreign direct investment, university business or university spinouts, and I'm lacking on the 4th one. It'll come to me or you'll bail me out.
How about I bail you out?
Yeah, there we go.
So the 4th one is net job creation at firms that are 6 years old and older. And you said foreign direct investment. It's actually we were ranked 5th nationally in percentage of employment at U.S. affiliates of foreign companies.
Absolutely. So the point being 4 top 10 rankings there, but I'm going to ask you to look at the other side a little bit, because there's at least 2 areas that are continue to be troublesome in what we're not seeing take place in Indiana.
Yeah, so I'd say the two most troubling numbers in this driver of dynamic and creative culture, the rate of new entrepreneurs. We ranked 44th nationally, which places us 4th out of 5th amongst our neighboring states, beating Ohio, and 5th out of 6th amongst our competitor states, beating out Minnesota. And then the share of employment at young companies, those businesses that are 5 years older or less, we ranked 47th nationally. That's last amongst our neighbors and 5th out of 6 amongst the competitor states, beating out Iowa. So, while Indiana's more established firms, those that are 6 years old or older, they're thriving. There's a real hole in startup activity.
Well, Adam, an additional area in this driver is venture capital. You mentioned earlier how we use that 3-year rolling average to kind of assess how Indiana's doing. Indiana's stuck in the mid-30s among the 50 states. But again, I like the way you've been describing this as really an opportunity there for Indiana compared to its Midwest neighbors in this venture capital area.
Yeah, so, let's just take a step back. In 1999, Indiana ranked 45th nationally. 10 years later, thanks in large part to the passage of the Venture Capital Investment Tax Credit, Indiana ranked 23rd. Since then, we've slipped into the 30s, where we've sort of been stuck for the last decade, ranking 35th in the snapshot. Now, this has been an area of focus this summer for me, certainly looking at policies that'll boost entrepreneurship and increase venture capital dollars. And I think there is a real opportunity. Policies that you tag team with the Next Level Fund and the venture capital investment tax credit is now transferable. Those are both very positive steps to attract venture capital. And there's really a groundswell of support for Indiana's tech and entrepreneurial community. So I think that there is the future is bright for Indiana on this front.
And this is one where, again, we've talked about it in recent years. The anecdotal evidence doesn't quite match up with the numbers. We see the momentum, especially in central Indiana, but as well as in other pockets of the state. We see additional venture capital dollars coming in. We see investments from firms on both the East and West Coast. So I hold out some positive hopes there that we're working in the right direction. It's just a little bit of a longer road maybe than sometimes we want to see.
Yeah, and I'll just, adding on to that, I'll give a plug to our certified technology parks that are spread throughout the state. A lot of great activity and spin-outs coming from our certified technology parks.
Kevin, I'm going to go back to the attractive business climate driver. And again, Adam shared that we do especially well there if you take out the healthcare metrics. Unfortunately, we can't take out the healthcare metrics for a true evaluation. So we've talked about this in this forum and many of our policy calls and other places about smoking, obesity, the detrimental impacts. What can be done short term to improve what honestly are some simply awful numbers for Indiana in those categories?
Well, we have to enact policies that drive consumer behavior. We did one major thing earlier this year in the 2020 session of the General Assembly by raising the legal age for selling and possessing tobacco and vaping products to age 21 from age 18. That will get those products largely out of the high schools. And it's important because 95% of all people who smoke throughout their lives start before age 21. And while not everyone will follow the law, just as we have underage drinking, most will, and that will get them beyond that period of time where they're most vulnerable to becoming addicted to nicotine and becoming a lifelong tobacco or vaping product user. The other key thing we need to do is raise cigarette tax, because smokers are price sensitive, particularly teenagers who don't tend to be carrying around a lot of extra money. And that is proven to reduce the rates of smoking in other states. There's a direct correlation nationally between the cigarette tax rate in the state or locality and the smoking rate. The higher the tax rate, the lower the smoking rate. And Indiana is now in a position where we have a lower tobacco tax rate than any of our surrounding states. And so that's something that we're going to be working on with our partners in the Alliance for Healthier Indiana to move forward through the legislature this session. And we think the time is right with the state's fiscal condition a little bit shaky. They may be looking for some money, and the $2 a pack increase that we're asking for would raise some $500 million in additional revenue to the state each year.
Well, the one driver we have not mentioned yet is superior infrastructure. And we've got a limited number of comparisons in this report, but let's touch on two quickly. First, it's not just the metric and the outcomes here, but something the Chamber's actively doing at this time to address that. Kevin, if you would talk about electricity prices and what the Chamber's doing in this area.
Well, we have a concern there because going back to the turn of the century, Indiana's electricity prices at that point in time were fifth lowest in the country and now ranked 31st. And so our electricity prices have gone up much faster than has occurred in most other states. And that's of particular importance and something we need to pay attention to, because as the most manufacturing intensive state in the country, electricity prices are important to manufacturers because they tend to be large consumers of electricity. And we've heard a lot of concerns expressed from the industrial side of our membership. And so the Chamber, through our Indiana Chamber Foundation, has launched an energy study to look at what has happened, why it has happened, what our energy mix should be in the future, and what policies should be enacted to strike the appropriate balance between a reliable source of electricity and energy in general and the lowest cost possible, and striking that balance. That will include recommendations that we'll take to the General Assembly in the 2021 session.
So, Kevin, we expect results of that study later this year, correct?
Yeah, correct. In October or early November is our target date. And so far, the researchers are telling us that that timeline is very doable.
Adam, another important measure under superior infrastructure is broadband. You shared with Tech Talk as one of our newsletters we share with our members. You had a great piece a few weeks ago of the increased demands brought on by the current pandemic, both for workers, for schools, obviously. This is always proven to be a challenging area. We see tremendous investments from Indiana companies, but we don't always see the take up, I guess, from consumers who may still lack access. What are some of the takeaways that you can offer in this broadband area from the snapshot?
Yeah, so I'll go through the numbers first and then maybe provide some commentary, if you will. So the report shows that 81.9% of residential units have wired high-speed connection, which ranks us 37th nationally, 4th out of 5th amongst our neighbors, beating out Kentucky, and 5th out of 6 amongst our competitor states, beating out Tennessee. And the second broadband metric we show is that 89.9% of Hoosiers have access to high-speed fixed broadband and mobile connectivity that meets the FCC standards, which ranks us 32nd nationally. Again, 4th out of 5th amongst our neighbors, beating out Kentucky, and last amongst our competitor states. And you mentioned the access versus adoption. I mean, this is an issue. It's a touchy issue. We have great companies, great member companies that that are stakeholders. It's tough. And we heard when the report first came out, for example, some of the problems that the providers have with the data that we use. The 81.9% of residential units with wired high-speed broadband connection. It might not include people who don't have computers. So we went back and we looked at the data, and actually, if we accounted for people who don't have computers, taking them out of the survey, our ranking would actually go down. It would make us worse. So it's one of you started out the podcast talking about data. You can make data say almost anything you want it to sometimes, and this is an area where it's just a matter of getting all the providers on the same on the same plane and talking about the same things using the same data sets. It's a struggle, but that being said, I think it is apparent and there's widespread consensus that we need more broadband in Indiana. So you got to applaud Governor Holcomb and his Next Level Connections program. In June, they had over $100 million of requests for grants to help spread broadband throughout the state. So again, progress is being made in this area, and with Indiana being only one of a handful of sort of 5G hotspots to develop 5G applications, the future is looking up.
I want to touch on another first-time feature in this report is Indiana regional data. And we included this because if I can make an analogy, ultimate success for Indiana Vision 2025 comes from an upward approach. We need individuals, communities, cities, regions, all must be successful for the state as a whole to thrive. So we took 11 metrics, primarily in the education and healthcare areas, and presented 2 data points for each of them on an Indiana regional basis. Now those regional numbers, the lower level that you get, the harder it is to compile these numbers. So the regional numbers require some different data sets, so there are not direct comparisons to how the state is doing overall. But for both of you, what are a few things you took away from as we looked at regional performances? And Kevin, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Tom. I would observe that for virtually every region, their metrics, their numbers went up in more than half of those 11 metrics. I think that's very encouraging. And the other thing that caught my eye was just as the state of Indiana as a whole has seen an upward trend in in-migration. We've had a positive in-migration the last 2 years. Many of the regions of the state have seen a positive in-migration as well. And that's important because we're going to need more talented individuals than just what we can grow and develop within our current citizenry. And so being able to attract talented individuals from out of state is going to be important to our overall economic development plan. And I think coming out of this pandemic, that Indiana is very well positioned to be a very attractive place, because I think a lot of people are going to rethink, do I want to live in dense urban areas versus, and if I have to work from home, do I want to try to do so in a small studio apartment, or do I want to come to a place like Indiana where the cost of living is much lower? I can buy a lot more house or apartment for my salary, and enjoy the wide open spaces a bit more so. So I think we've got some opportunities and advantages there.
Adam, your thoughts on some of the regional takeaways?
I think a couple of the bright spots that can be gleaned from the regional data, you'll see that there was no decline in bachelor or associate's degrees from last year. Also, there was an increase in per capita income in all 12 of the DWD regions. Average of $2,200 increase in per capita income. Now, unfortunately, due to COVID, I don't know that is going to continue, but that was at least reported for this year. And I guess on the downside, all but one region saw an increase in obesity rates, and 5 of the 12 regions in smoking rates increase, which is disappointing for a variety of reasons that Kevin mentioned earlier.
Last question as we prepare to wrap up, and Adam, I'll ask you first. So we have this latest analysis. We'll be back, plans certainly for another full report card in 2021, where we compare Indiana to all the states. Talk about your perspective as we look forward, kind of what's next. What are some of those key things to emphasize to help improve Indiana's overall performance?
Right. So we, it is Indiana Vision 2025. And so there are just a few years left to meet the ambitious goals that we laid out. And so I think the main thing that we have to do is we have to prioritize. We have to understand what's working in other states and why, and do the best that we can with what we have. Other states are not slowing down, and so we have to ultimately we have to refocus and make investments in what's working, and make adjustments in time for the publication of Indiana Vision 2040.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, that 2025 time frame or horizon seemed pretty far out when this plan was being developed back in 2010 and 2011. But lo and behold, as Adam pointed out, it's 5 years away.
Yes, indeed. And we're in the home stretch, so to speak. There is still considerable work yet to be done. And what I've learned from the 2 economic vision plans that the Chamber has produced and that I've worked on directly is I fundamentally believe that we've gotten farther and moved farther as a state because of those 2 plans than we would have otherwise. And it goes back to the sayings of, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. And if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Well, we've known where we're going because Indiana Vision 2025 and its predecessor, Economic Vision 2010, have served as the Chamber's guiding star and have driven us to push ever harder in the public policy arena and identify the report cards, the biennial report cards, and now this Snapshot report card have given us metrics and measures to show where we need to redouble our efforts and where we can celebrate successes. I think in these last final years, one of the things we're going to need to do with the gigantic disruption of our economy by the pandemic is we don't want to abandon Indiana Vision 2025. The goals are still valid, but there are probably some adjustments to be made and some new goals as we look at the impact of the pandemic on our economy. And just to give you one example, reshoring. A lot of companies are going to be rethinking their supply chains, and the United States as a whole. Are we too dependent on countries that maybe aren't reliable, or supply chains that are very fragile? And should we reshore those manufacturing activities? And if so, we want Indiana to be at the front of the line, and there are some policies that we probably can and should pursue to help make that happen.
Well, Kevin Brinegar, Adam Barry, thanks so much for the time today and for the continued work on this important Indiana Vision 2025 plan.
Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, we've thrown a lot of numbers and information at you. You have access to all of it at indianachamber.com/2025. Again, indianachamber.com/2025. You'll not only find the latest report, the 2020 snapshot, you'll find the previous Indiana Vision 2025 report cards. They're all broken down by the competitor states, by the drivers, the Indiana regional data. We encourage you to dig in, take a look at that information. This episode concludes season 3 of the In Chamber. We've over the last 11 plus months, we've brought you new episodes on a wide variety of topics. Conclude season 3, but season 4 will be back in less than a month. We take a very, very short break. Planning and is underway for season 4 as we look to continue our conversations, bring you additional information, highlight leaders from Indiana and beyond. We thank you as always for listening to the In Chamber. Encourage you once again, check out Indiana Vision 2025, and we will be back in early September with season 4. Thank you.